Verse 2, chapter 4. In that day, and just notice that phrase because I'm going to talk about that a lot. In that day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped. And it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem. When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning, then the Lord will create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. Those of you who know the Old Testament see in that right away the book of Exodus. We'll talk about that again in just a few minutes. For over all the glory there will be a covering, and there will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from storm and rain. Now, we're going to go straight to the notes. So in this passage, beginning in verse 2, it begins with that phrase, in that day, the branch of the Lord. And that's going to be really our primary focus for the first few minutes this morning. I want to begin with this quote from Barry Webb. And I'm just using this quote because it kind of summarizes everything that we would want to say in an introduction. The expression in that day, that phrase, has run like a refrain through the whole preceding judgment section. It began in chapter 2, verse 6, and it runs all the way through chapter 4, verse 1. And then you see in parentheses 6x, 6 times. 6 times in that section, the phrase in that day has appeared. And then I'll explain this. I'm going to read it, and then I'll explain it. In the foreshortening, so typical of prophetic literature, the day of Zion's fall has merged with the great and final day of the Lord, of which it is an anticipation. But now, here in chapter 4 and verse 2, the expression is used climactically as the prophet's attention is fixed again on the very end of history, the goal towards which everything is moving under God. Let me talk about that little word foreshortening and what he is saying. It's a big word, but what he is saying is, and I've sort of alluded to this before, but most Old Testament prophecy has kind of a dual purpose, and it usually is speaking to something that is present or soon to come, but it's also looking toward the final day as well. So all of these allusions to the day of the Lord usually have reference to something that was going to happen near to their time, the present, but then also has future implications as well. Kind of like there's a lot of little days of the Lord, and then there's one final day of the Lord. And so in chapter 2, verse 6 through chapter 4, verse 1, when he has been using that phrase, the day of the Lord, 6 times, he's been talking about what's going to happen to Israel and Judah in the in the near present, or in the near future, not near present, in the near future, like within 100 or 200 years. And of course, in Israel's case, even less than that. But now when he gets to chapter 4 and verse 2, he's using in the day of the Lord, looking toward the end. And he's talking about, okay, after all these little days of the Lord, now we have this big one that's coming. So that's part of the, not struggle, but part of the process of understanding prophecy in the Old Testament is understanding that sometimes it's looking at the present, and sometimes it's looking at the future. I'm going to give you a great example. We'll be there in just a week or two. In Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14, God gives a sign to Ahaz, and it's a sign that a virgin would conceive. And so the question is, was there a virgin that conceived in Isaiah, or is that foreshadowing something else? And of course, we come to understand it was clearly looking at Jesus, but there are things that prophesy for their day and things that are a little bit further in the future. So what we see in this section I read to you, the opening part today, chapter 4, verses 2 through 6, is God now looking to the climactic end. He's looking to the final glory for Zion, or the final glory for Jerusalem, after they are ultimately judged. All right. And so now we're talking about Revelation kind of stuff. We're talking about the coming of the Lord, we're talking about final judgment, we're talking about new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God. That's what he begins to look at. And he goes back and forth, but that's what this section is specifically dealing with. Notice in chapter 3 and verse 16, the daughters of Zion are haughty, and they walk with, remember this passage 2 weeks ago? They walk with outstretched necks and wanton eyes, walking and mincing as they go, making a jingling with their feet. So they, in chapter 3 and verse 16, they have embodied this sinful, degenerate, um, lustful, ungodly way and manner. But now, when we get to chapter 4, verses 2 through 6, look at actually verse 4. When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, so now the same ones that were degenerate, the people of Jerusalem, are now going to be cleansed and purged. They're the object of God's cleansing and purging. So the great and final day of the Lord, now we're talking about the final one, is both dreadful, horrific, and at the same time, it is glorious, and it is God's ultimate purpose. Let me make this statement. God's ultimate purpose is not destruction of the people that he loves. It is purging, cleansing, and restoration. Let me give you a couple of scriptures. I put them here in your notes. 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 9, and this is in a section that's dealing with the day of the Lord. It says, God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. It is not God's intention for us to be under his wrath. Jesus took that at the cross. God's intention is to restore us and to save us. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 4 and 5, we are being saved to an inheritance that is incorruptible and undefiled, that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. Don't get lost in that. That's simply saying what God's ultimate purpose is. He's got a reservation for us in heaven. He wants to restore all people. He's not willing that any perish. His ultimate goal is not to destroy. It's to purge and cleanse and then restore, so that we can have eternity with him. This is God's plan for his people. And as I just mentioned, 2 Peter 3:9, he is not willing that any perish. So, but in this text, he is speaking specifically about his covenant people, Judah and Israel. That's the north. This is the north. Judah is the south. The divided kingdom. These are his people, and his ultimate goal is to cleanse and purge them so that there can be a new Jerusalem and God can dwell with his people again. So let's look now a little more specifically at these verses. God's purpose for his people is seen in 4 images, and the first image comes right out of verse 2. In that day, look, the branch, notice probably your Bibles have branch capitalized B, because it's often a reference to Christ. In that day, the branch of the Lord. The word for branch is semak. Put that in your notes. And this is the first time that the branch is used as a picture of the Messiah to come. And Isaiah is prophesying between 739 and 685 BC. Flip over to chapter 11 of Isaiah, and you will see in verse 1, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse. Everybody remember who Jesse was? Jesse was David's father. So we're talking about the lineage of David. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch, capital B, shall grow out of its roots. And then if you'll look, same chapter, and look at verse 10. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. So this branch that comes from the root of Jesse is a picture of the Messiah that's to come. Isaiah is the first one to use that. Now, flip over to Jeremiah, the next book in the Bible. Jeremiah uses this same phrase, but Isaiah is the one that introduces it. Look at Jeremiah 23 and verse number 5. Behold, the days are coming. I'm sorry, did I give you time to get there? Jeremiah 23:5. I'll let you get there. Sorry. Jeremiah 23:5. How many remember sword drills? All right. Okay. We're seeing how good you are at this. All right. Jeremiah 23:5. Behold, the days are coming, saith the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch. See that? Of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper. And so here, Jeremiah is picking up the motif that Isaiah started with. And then if you'll flip over to same book, still Jeremiah, and look at 33 of Jeremiah, verse 15. Jeremiah 33:15. In those days and at that time, I will cause to grow up to David a branch, see it again, capital B, of righteousness. All right, so flip over to Zechariah now. Zechariah is the next to last book in the Old Testament, right before Malachi. Go to Matthew, back up to the left. There's how you can find Zechariah. All right, Zechariah, and look at chapter 3. So let me put this in perspective. You want to look at your notes once you get to Zechariah 3. So Isaiah is the first to use the branch. He's prophesying late 700s, early 600 BC. Then Jeremiah uses it, and he prophesies late 600s, early 500 BC. And then we go down to Zechariah, who is prophesying between the years of 520 and 518 BC. And chapter 3, verse 8, Hear, O Joshua the high priest, you and your companions who sit before you, for they are a wondrous sign. For behold, I am bringing forth my servant, the branch. All right. And then if you will look at chapter 6 of Zechariah, in verse 12, then speak to him, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, saying, Behold, the man whose name is the branch. Okay, now I'm done with the quick little sword drill Bible study for a minute. Point is, Isaiah is the first one that introduces the branch as a picture of the Messiah to come. About 100 years later, Jeremiah does it, and about another 50 to 100 years later, Zechariah does it. It becomes a picture of the Messiah that is to come. Now, go back to Isaiah. Go back there to Isaiah chapter 4 in verse 2. In that day, the branch of the Lord. Now, here, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment, it seems to be that he's speaking not just specifically of an individual, the Messiah, but he's talking about the nation or the people. Um, it's I hesitate to use this term, but we understand it from the New Testament. We call it identification theology in New Testament. What does Galatians 2:20 say? I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. All right. We are to abide in him. He is to abide in us. And so this is kind of a foreshadowing of the people of God abiding in the Messiah, the branch. All right. That's kind of the picture that's seen here. Now go back to chapter 4, verse 2. In that day, the branch of the Lord, the people of God who have identified with the Messiah, they shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing. So, beautiful and glorious is what he, the branch, will make his people who abide in him. As a matter of fact, let me just muddy this a little bit more because I enjoy doing that. Turn to Revelation 22. It's not in the notes, and I hope I get this right because it's not in my notes. Revelation 22. Revelation 22. Actually, 21. Sorry, 21. Saw a new heaven, new earth. First heaven, first earth passed away. There was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, adorned out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them. They shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. That's that picture of identification. God's people. New Jerusalem comes down. God's people dwell with him. He dwells with them. The branch of Isaiah 4 is describing the people of God in the Messiah looking forward to the final day, the day of the Lord, when this daughters of Jerusalem that in chapter 3 were an ungodly mess are now beautiful and glorious. They've been restored, they've been purged, they've been cleansed. That's the picture that we get from the branch. Now, go back to chapter 4 and verse 2. I said it'd be simple. Everybody feels that, right? You feel the simplicity of this? All right. So in that day, the branch of the Lord, again, it's in that day. We're not talking about 500 BC now. We're talking about this is looking forward to that day, the branch, the Messiah, his people that were once a mess will be beautiful now. They'll be glorious. And then there's this phrase in verse 2, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped. Okay, all through, we haven't been many weeks yet, but we've already talked about the remnant several times. Okay, most of Israel, because they've rejected God, end up being judged, but there's a remnant that holds on and believes. That's why that phrase, fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped, the remnant that have trusted, that have believed, the Simeons that held on and believed and said, now I can die in peace because my eyes have seen your salvation. The remnant of people, and that really extends even beyond Judah and Israel, the people of God in general. I don't know about you, but sometimes don't you feel like kind of a remnant left in this kind of messed up world? So God's plan is for those who do endure, they're going to become glorious. They will dwell with him. He will dwell with them. And then notice that phrase, the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing. This is what God promised to Israel to begin with as Joshua went in to possess it. I'm not going to have you turn there. I've had you all over the place already. But if you look at Deuteronomy 6 and Joshua 21, Think about, and that's why they're still fighting over it today. Think about how much of this promise to Israel had to do with the land. I mean, do you remember when God spoke to Abraham? Every place that your foot touches will be yours. Look to the north, the south, the east, and the west. It's all yours. This land is yours. And so then they wander in the wilderness before they conquest or take over the promised land. And remember when they send in spies, there's grapes, the huge grapes, that it's a land that flows with milk and honey. So that's all, it's literal, but it's also metaphorically speaking of a land that God has promised to his people. So this is all restoration language. The land, the branch is going to make the people of God beautiful and glorious, and the land, the fruit of the earth, shall be excellent and appealing. The land had significance to them because it was a sign of God's provision and God's grace. And God's covenant, go back to Isaiah 1, just flip a couple of pages back. Why is the land so important? Look at verse 7 and 8. Because they had sinned so greatly and they had been pummeled by the Assyrians that kept dodging in and dodging out. Your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Strangers devour your land in your presence. It is desolate, as overthrown by strangers. So the daughter of Zion is left as a booth in a vineyard, as a hut in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. That's how bad it had become. That in chapter 4, God is saying the day is coming when your land is going to be beautiful and glorious again. All right, does that make sense? It's a promise of what is to come. A remnant would survive and would enjoy God's grace. So we have a branch, we have a fruitful land, and then thirdly, we have a holy city. Look, verse 3, chapter 4. In verse 3, it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion, that's the remnant, and remains in Jerusalem, will be called holy. Everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem. And when the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. And then we'll move on to verse 5 and verse 6 in just a moment. A holy city. So after the purging, the daughters of Jerusalem will be clean. Those daughters of Jerusalem that were provocative and were part of the spirit of the world in chapter 3, he's going to cleanse them. The city is holy because it's the place that God chose to dwell among his people. That's what we see in Revelation 21. Once a faithful city, but it had become desolate. Flip back to chapter 1. I just want to show you all these connections. Look at chapter 1 and verse 21. How the faithful city has become a harlot. That's where they were when Isaiah is prophesying. The faithful city has become a harlot. But as he looks ahead in chapter 4 and verse 4, when the Lord's washed away their filth, the city will be called holy again. All right? So once a faithful city, but in Isaiah's day had become wicked, but God is going to restore it through the branch of the Lord, and both the elect and the faithful are called holy. The spirit of judgment and the spirit of burning, that's what brings about this cleansing. Let me just pause for a moment. Let me get off the biblical text for a second. Don't make this too complicated. This is what, in the large picture, at the end of time, God does in our lives individually. How does he get rid of the carnal flesh in our lives? He puts us through trials, fire heats up, and the junk cleanses, right? That's a metaphor that runs all the way through Scripture. And now that's what he's doing collectively with Israel, because he is so committed to his people. He's not going to let Satan get the final word. Even though they got wicked and they turned away from him, he is saying, but I'm going to restore you. It's going to be through the fire. We're going to have to cleanse out all the junk. We're going to have to get rid of all the garbage, but I'm going to make you who I destined you to be. Spirit of judgment, a spirit of burning. Think about this. Not unlike, let's not forget this because it's kind of the centerpiece of the book of Isaiah. I read it week 1. We're going to get to it next week. Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up. And he hears the seraphim saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And what does Isaiah say? I am undone. I am unclean. I dwell in the midst of a people who have unclean lips. And what does the angel do? He takes a coal, takes tongs, gets a coal off the altar, and he purges and cleanses the lips of Isaiah. And he says, now you're clean. So Isaiah is walking out as the prophet what's going to happen to the nation later. That's a picture. So Isaiah can talk about this because he knows how much God loves his people, and he's going to purge them and he's going to cleanse them. So that's the spirit of purging and cleansing. And of course, it has eschatological, that means end times underpinning, and there would be lesser purgings along the way. I won't have you turn there, but if you read Hebrews 12, 22 through 27, and 2 Peter 3, 10 through 13, it talks about that cleansing, the fire, and a new heaven and a new earth and a new Jerusalem emerges from the purging fire. I said I wouldn't have you turn there, but let's turn there. I want you to see it. All right. Look at Hebrews 12. I just think it's helpful. And chapter 5, since I lied about chapter 4, chapter 5 really is easy. So if we can just get to chapter 5, but I want to take a little time here. Hebrews 12 and look at verse 20. And I think it's 22, I'm sorry. But you have come to Mount Zion. Let me, it really will make more sense if we go all the way back to verse 18. I'm sorry. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched, that burn with fire, into blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of the trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the words should not be spoken to them anymore. Let me just stop there. What is he saying? You're not coming to what mountain? You're not coming again. This is New Testament. He's saying you're not coming to Mount Sinai like your forefathers did in the book of Exodus, a mountain that could be touched, and a mountain where God spoke and the trumpet sounded. You're not coming to there again. Verse 20, for they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. So terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I'm exceedingly afraid and trembling. So you remember that whole Exodus story when God said, build a perimeter around Mount Sinai. Don't get too close to it. If you do, you'll be destroyed. But the writer of Hebrews is saying, now we're in the new covenant. You're not going to that mountain again. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. Let me just pause there again. He's saying, we're not going back to Sinai. You're all headed to heaven. You're all headed to Mount Zion, the new Jerusalem. So then he says in verse 25, make sure you don't refuse him who speaks. So God is calling you, don't rebel against him, because if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, so back at Sinai, everybody who rejected God and Moses who spoke from earth, they died. If they didn't escape, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven. So if the people at Mount Sinai and Exodus got judged, how much more in the new covenant, when we have the Word and the Holy Spirit, will we be judged if we don't turn to Him? Now look at verse 26, whose voice then shook the earth. And now he is promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. And this once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. Look for our God as a consuming fire. All right. So God is shaking. He is purging so that his people can ultimately come to the New Jerusalem. Now, flip over to 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2, and look at chapter 3, excuse me, look at verse 10. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heaven and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. That's the new Jerusalem that comes down. So this is all, we're back to Isaiah 4 now. You can turn back there, all pointing to this day. There will be purging, and it will again become a holy city. And then in verse 5 and 6 of chapter 4, so there's the branch, there's the fruitful land, there's the holy city, and then there's this canopy of God's glory. Verse 5, the Lord will create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion, and above her assemblies a cloud and a smoke by day, and a shining of flaming fire by night. For all over the glory there will be a covering, and there will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for shelter from the storm and the rain. Covering. This is the New Jerusalem. There'll be a covering, a canopy. And again, I mentioned it when I read it. See all of the Exodus allusions, the pillar of fire and the cloud and the glory of God. The wilderness wanderings, Israel wandering in the wilderness for 40 days, did not give way to perfect rest. But in that day, it will. Okay, that's even what Hebrews talks about. Make sure you're entering into the rest, because they didn't, the people in Exodus. The picture is one of pilgrimage. Remember the prayer that Jesus prayed in John 17 to the Father, glorify me together with yourself with the glory which I had before the world was. And that's Jesus is saying, I want to be back in that canopy of your presence, that glory. And that's exactly what Isaiah is prophesying about. And that's what we read in Revelation 22. There'll be no need for lamp or light, for the Lord God gives them the light. So this is all a picture of the future that is to come. So on the top of page 3, there's 4 simple lessons from this kind of complex, just short little chapter. And we only looked at 5 verses of it. Here are the takeaways. God does not give up on his plan or his purpose for his people. All right, we're talking about, he's prophesying this in 700 something BC. And we're 2026 AD. And this promise is still out there to be fully realized. God doesn't give up on his plan or his purpose. Aren't we thankful that he is patient with us? All right. Secondly, that intended purpose is for us to dwell and abide with him. He wants us to live with him forever. Think about what Jesus said in John 14. Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I come again and receive you into myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. That's the language of Revelation 22. I will be their God and they will be my people. That's his ultimate plan. And he does not give up on that. Number three, before that can happen, there has to be a purification. And that's why we're in this process of being sanctified and purified. And number four, it's good to remember that our happiness is not as important to God as our holiness. Because without holiness, we cannot see the Lord. You can see the Lord without happiness. You cannot see the Lord without holiness. He must purge away the sin and the uncleanness in order that we can ultimately dwell with him. All right, those are the real practical takeaways from chapter 4. Now let's tackle chapter 5. I know it's 30 verses, but it's 30 verses that are way simpler than those 5 verses in chapter 4. And let me make this statement before I read the first 7 of them. The message of Isaiah, and I said this in lesson 1, and I probably said it in every lesson. The message of Isaiah is always in flux. He goes from hope to judgment, back to hope, from joy to sorrow. It's this back and forth. This is what it is. This is what it can be. This is what you're going through now. This is what you'll realize. And so it was not an easy message to find an audience. Remember, when God calls Isaiah, we'll look at it next week. God says they're gonna hear but not understand. They're gonna see, but they're still gonna be blind. Their hearts are gonna get harder. And Isaiah said, "How long do I have to do this?" And he says, "Until I'm done. Until there's not an inhabitant left." So it's not a great calling to go and preach to people that aren't really interested in what you have to say, but that's what Isaiah has to do. That's his calling. Not an easy message, especially considering Judah's backslidden state. But in this chapter, Isaiah uses a song that he has written. So it becomes like a poem song to declare the prophecy. And look at verse 1. Let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. I'm going to tell you now, you'll see it. His vineyard is Judah and Israel. All right. God's vineyard is Judah and Israel. By the way, that language, there's a couple of parables of Jesus that say that. Jesus himself uses the vineyard metaphor. I'm the vine and you're the branches. So this is the way Jesus sometimes, and the word sometimes, has to talk to us. So he uses this song that he's written to declare the prophecy, a song of my beloved, that's regarding his vineyard. Despite all the care, I'm giving you the summary of this song. Despite all the care he gave to his vineyard, the vineyard was unproductive and fruitless, and thus deserving to be cast away. Let me read the first 7 verses. So now let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up, cleared out its stones. He planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, please, between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? And now, please, let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it shall be burned. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned or dug, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. So if there's any question as who the vineyard is, all right, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, but behold oppression. He looked for righteousness, but behold, there was a cry for help. All right, this is actually very simple. God is saying to Israel and Judah, you are my vineyard. You're my beloved vineyard. And I planted a vineyard when I called Abraham, and I made all of these great promises to him. I gave you the covenants, I gave you the law, I gave you prophets, I gave you leaders like Moses. I did everything I could so that you would produce good fruit and good grapes, and all you've done is produce wild grapes. And God even says, okay, Israel, Judah, you tell me, what more could I have done? This is God speaking. What more could I have done? Is there something else I missed? Could I have blessed you even more? Could I have rolled the waters of the Red Sea back 3 times instead of 1? Could I have fed you for 80 years in the wilderness instead of 40? Could you have hit one more rock and had what? What more could I have done? I mean, that's the kind of thing God, what more could I have done? So all his work that he did for them, hard work, set them up to succeed, had expectations, but they only bore wild grapes. Let me just pause for a second. Think about that in light of what Jesus said, John 15. Every branch that doesn't bear fruit, I will cut off, purge it, and throw it in the fire. And even the branches that do bear fruit, I will trim down so that they can bear more fruit. This is divine language. This is how God works with his people. There's no fruit, cast them away. But even if there is fruit, he wants there to be more fruit. So he purges us. Sometimes when we go through a difficult place, God, what have I done wrong? Maybe nothing wrong. Maybe you're really bearing fruit, but God wants you to bear a little bit more. So he's cutting a little bit. That's again, the way that God deals with his people. In verse 3 and 4, he asks for that verdict. What more could I have done? Please judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done? But then he makes his decision, verse 5 and 6. Let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. This is really interesting. Look at verse 5. I'm going to take away its hedge. Again, you read through that in your daily devotions. I'm going through the Bible in a year, and you read that, and you don't pause to think about what that means. But what that means is God is saying, your border that I protected, Israel, I'm going to remove that border. In 722 BC, and Assyria is going to march in because I'm going to remove that hedge. And Judah, you're going to get a few more years, but in 586 BC, I'm going to remove your border. And King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon is going to march in. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's what this language is all about. And again, who is the vineyard and what was their failure? Verse 7, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The men of Judah are his pleasant plant. What was their failure? He looked for justice. The word is mishpat. And instead of justice, he found oppression, which is kind of a play on words, is mishpat. I looked for mishpat, which is justice, but I found oppression, mishpat. And I looked for righteousness, which is tzedakah, but instead of righteousness, I only found cries for help, which is sekah. Now let me return to the context here, and this will make sense. During King Uzziah's reign, Judah had become very prosperous. When there is great prosperity, then and now, an elite class emerges. And their love of wealth and pleasure started to control their appetites. Can I, without interpreting it this way, and you saying, oh, you're misinterpreting scripture, can I make an application? You've heard speakers say before, missionaries, when America is judged on a world standard when it comes to socioeconomic wealth, even the poorest of America are wealthier than a world that is that is outside of America. We sometimes wonder, why do we see God moving in such great ways in Africa? I mean, revival is really in Africa right now. It was 20 years ago, it was in South America. Now it's really in Africa. There's a lot of pain. There's the rise of Islam certainly, but God is moving around the world. And we sometimes wonder, why don't we see that here? Well, this is why. We've become, we're the wealthy ones, we're the prosperous ones. And prosperity, what did God say to Israel? When you go into Canaan and you get prosperous, don't forget me. And are we not living in a time where we have forgotten God? We have everything else we need. So this is the danger of blessing. God doesn't say you don't need blessed, but he blesses his people for responsibility. And if they turn it inward on themselves, he has to judge. So I read this and I think, you know what? He's no respecter of persons. This is the way God deals. And I mean, you hear people saying all the time, America really needs to awaken, or we will experience judgment at a level that I'm not certain we even can imagine. So we must be careful as we read this to remember that Israel and Judah was not just a country built on the worship of God, they were his covenant people. There's a difference between a Christian nation and a nation with Christians. America at one time was a Christian nation. Now America is a nation with Christians. Israel was a monotheistic nation. They were called and sustained by God. And this message was to them. You once served me exclusively, and now you're caught up in Baal worship and all this stuff. To us, the message is not to the political establishment. It's not to the not to the secular world. It's to the people of God. We don't, again, Israel and Judah, and I don't want to complicate this, but Israel and Judah there was no separation of their priest and their political leaders. They were a nation built on God. So we can get mad at Washington and Indianapolis and the mayor and whatever you want to. You can get mad at everybody, but the message is to the vineyard. The message is to the people of God. It's not to those who, to those who don't even claim to be following God. A little funny, we were at the conference we were at, because I got real serious. Let me give you a little funny, but this kind of makes the point. And this may go over like a lead balloon, because you all know, everybody know what I'm talking about when you don't have to know lots about him, but everybody know the deal with Bad Bunny. Do you all know Bad Bunny that did the halftime show and all of that? But one of our speakers, he was from Romania, and he was a Church of God pastor from Romania. And he said he didn't really have much problem with Bad Bunny, because at least Bad Bunny acknowledges that he's a bad bunny. He said, the problem I have is people that are really saying they're good bunnies and they're really bad bunnies. And I mean, Bad Bunny's an ungodly, he's just being what an ungodly bad bunny does. But the problem is when the people of God say, oh, we're good bunnies, but we live ungodly. That's a bigger problem. So we can get all, ramped up about all the other stuff. The world's just acting like the world. That's not the problem. The problem is the church is acting like the world. Aren't you glad you came this morning? That's true. It's true. He's not sending this message to the atheist on the other side of Israel's border. He's talking to the vineyard. The vineyard, the one that's supposed to bear fruit. Bad Bunny's not supposed to bear fruit. Christians are supposed to bear fruit. All right. So then he begins this woe, therefore pattern for their particular sins. This is a powerful denunciation of their failure. But not just that, there's emotion in these next few verses. longing for the people of God to turn back to him. And in these woes, it reveals the danger and the corrupt power of the love of riches. There's 6 woes in verses 8 through 23. We're going to read through them fast. Verse 8, woe to those who join house to house. They add field to field, till there is no place where they may dwell alone in the midst of the land. In my hearing, the Lord of hosts said, truly, many houses shall be desolate, great and beautiful ones, without inhabitant. For the 10 acres of vineyard shall yield 1 bath, and an omer of seed shall yield 1 ephah. What is that talking about? It's talking about greed. It's the acquisition of land. They're adding house to house, field to field, and they're doing it in a corrupt way. And their judgment will be not more homes, but less homes, and the failure of the harvest. So this is God saying, my vineyard has become too greedy. They're all about themselves. That has huge implications to our generosity. Are we hoarding it to ourselves, or are we using it responsibly for the kingdom? Then in verses 11 and 12, he pronounces woe on pleasure and alcohol. Look at verse 11 and 12. Woe to those who rise early in the morning, that they may follow intoxicating drink, who continue till night, till wine inflames them. The harp and the strings, tambourine and the flute and the wine are in their feast. But they do not regard the work of the Lord, nor consider the operation of his hands. It pictures the intoxicating effect of alcohol and the love for pleasure that comes to the affluent. Alcohol, his point is, this is not you know where I stand on it, but that's my personal conviction. This is not about whether a person drinks at all or not. That's not what this is about. But alcohol dulls the spiritual sensitivities. That's the point that is being made. A God once sought for peace, that they would come to God for peace, is now replaced by a substitute God that is found in a bottle. Now, I will say, whatever your stance is on alcohol, it's not pejorative. But if you got to have it to give you peace, there's something wrong with your relationship with Jesus. I will say that. That was the problem with Israel and Judah. Like, we once could seek you, but all right, the judgment of captivity. This is the judgment. They've all caught up in pleasure. And in verse 13 and 14, therefore my people have gone into captivity because of that. Because they have no knowledge, their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore Sheol has enlarged itself. Sheol is the underground. The hell has enlarged itself and opened its mouth beyond measure. Their glory and their multitude and their pomp. And he who is jubilant shall descend into it. It's made even more graphic. Leviticus 20, I wanted to read that. Leviticus 20:22 says, keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I'm bringing you to live may not vomit you out. Israel, if you go in and you become all about yourself, the land will vomit you out. And then that's made more graphic with the mention of Sheol. And Jewish thought it was the underworld, the place of death. This is describing the humbling that would come at the hands of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. It would not reveal, can I look at verse 15 and 16? People shall be brought down, each man shall be humble. That's because the hedge is removed. And the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But look at verse 16. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God who is holy shall be hallowed in righteousness. So this humbling at the hands of the Assyrians and the Babylonians is not going to make God look powerless. It actually reveals that he is all powerful, and he is going to judge and purge his people, and he's letting a foreign nation do that. And while exiled from the land, look at verse 17, then the lambs shall feed in their pasture, and in the waste places of the fat strangers shall eat. So while they will be exiled, 722, 586, strangers are going to make themselves at home in their land. That's what that is prophesying. You're going to be run out, but your captors are going to come in and they're going to dwell in your land. Verse 18 and 19, There is a woe against their arrogant rebellion. 18 and 19. Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of vanity and sin as if with a cart rope, that say, let him make speed and hasten his work that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come that we may know it. So let me read that to you in the New Living Translation. What sorrow for those who drag their sins behind them with ropes made of lies, who drag wickedness behind them like a cart. They even mock God and say, come on, hurry up and do something. We want to see what you can do. Let the Holy One of Israel carry out his plan, for we want to know what it is. So in other words, they deceive and they pull with the ropes, others with them. It begins just as cords, but as they reject the truth, the lies become cart ropes. Pictures a beast harnessed to and dragging a cart. And ultimately, it becomes unbreakable bondage that ultimately leads. Look at verse 20. This is where we are. It leads to a complete reversal of the moral culture. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Is that not our world today? And not just our world. I mean, in pulpits, we are twisting Scripture, making it mean what we want it to mean. Don't miss the new series in First John that starts this Sunday, a little plug. At sea without a rudder, a culture without truth. That's what's happened here to them. Self-vindicating wisdom, not content with remaining in their own sin, they justify it and they make others believe it as well. Look at the conceit of verse 21. What are those who are wise in their own eyes? And verse 20. We already talked about that. The culture change, self-vindicating wisdom. Good is evil, evil is good. And then the conceit of verse 21. What are those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight? That's the root cause of it all. Motyer says this is humanity's insistence upon their own autonomy. I'll do what I want to do. I'll make myself what I want to make myself be. I'll make my own rules. Again, this is clearly where we have gotten to as a people. And then the perversion of justice, the woe to them in verse 22 and 23. Woe to men mighty at drinking wine, woe to men valiant for mixing intoxicating drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away justice from the righteous man. Bribes, corruption, and justice are rampant. Can I just talk to you for a minute? I'll be done by 11:15, I promise. But again, it's real easy for us to transfer this to the world and just say, it's a bad world. And it is. It's a bad world. But this again, I know I'm broken record here, but it's far more concerning that this kind of thing is in the church. And we cover up stuff now because it would mean the loss of wealth. It would mean the loss of ability to even do ministry. Well, we expose that, we might lose something. And I'm not saying that I'm not giving you a hypothetical. I'm watching it firsthand in a couple of incidences where people are glossing over sin that needs to be dealt with because it would mean the loss of wealth or with the opportunity. And the church cannot do that. God will not bless that. And we'll sweep this under the rug for you give a little bit more to missions and we won't let that be noticed. That cannot happen. And so my concern is not the world because we're the ones supposed to be changing the world. My concern is there's not going to be anything left to change the world if the church doesn't get its act in line. And so Again, I'm going to say over and over, this text is written to the vineyard, not to the world. All right. Then in verses 24 through 30, and I'm taking a couple of things here from Paul Winger, who really handles this part of the text really well. Let me just read it to you, and then we'll be done. Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble and the flame consumes the chaff, so their root will be as rottenness and their blossom will ascend like dust. It's just a picture of devastation because they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore, the anger of the Lord is aroused against his people. He's stretched out, look at this phrase, stretched out his hand against them. He's stricken them. And the hills trembled. Their carcasses were as refuse in the midst of the street. For all this, his anger is not, for all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. He will lift up a banner to the nations from afar. This is really great. It's interesting language. I'll explain it all in just a minute. He will lift up his banner to the nations from afar and will whistle to them from the end of the earth, and surely they will come with speed swiftly. No one will be weary or stumble among them. No one will slumber or sleep, nor will the belt on their loins be loosed, nor the strap of their sandals broken, whose arrows are sharp and all their bows bent. Their horses' hooves will seem like flints, and their wheels like a whirlwind. Their roaring will be like a lion. They will roar like young lions. Yes, they will roar and lay hold of the prey. They will carry it away safely, and no one will deliver. In that day they will roar against them like the roaring of the sea. And if one looks to the Lamb, behold, darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened by the clouds. So after all the warnings, verse 25, God's people have not responded. And so his hand is raised against them in verse 25. The anger of the Lord is roused. He has stretched out his hand against them. By the way, that's terminology that's only found in Isaiah. The therefore of verse 24 tells us this is the consequence of their behavior, fire and rottenness that destroy both the fruit and the root. His hand is stretched out against them in verse 25. Notice in verse 26, he will lift up a banner to the nations from afar, and he will whistle to them from the end of the earth, and they will come with speed, swiftly. This just simply tells us that God controls the nations. And at just a whistle, 722 BC, got a whistle, and Assyria and Tiglath-Pileser III, or TP3, marches down and he destroys Israel. God's in charge of that. It's his whistle. It's bringing, the nations don't act on their own. God says, now's the time, and he whistles and they come. And then in verses 27 through 29, he's just describing the strength of Babylon and Assyria. Let me just, a couple of notes from verse 27. None of them will be weary. They won't stumble. They won't slumber or sleep. Their belt won't be loosed. Verse 28, their arrows will be sharp and their bows will be bent and their horses' hooves will seem like flint. And they'll be fast like a whirlwind. Verse 29, their roaring will be like a lion. So all of this just describes the strength of Assyria and later Babylon. In verse 30, utter destruction. The wealth and the glory of Israel and Judah would be gone. I really love this little verse. I just sort of mentioned it, the second part of verse 25. For all this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still stretched out still. Still, there's still grace. Let me read you these two quotes. This concludes, says J.A. Motyer, what is the preface of Isaiah. The message of the first two sections is that human sin cannot ultimately frustrate God's purpose, and that in God, mercy triumphs over wrath. But the third section posed a shattering question. When the Lord has done all, must the darkness of divine wrath close in and the light flicker and fade? This was the day of crisis in which Isaiah ministered, a crisis for humankind. For the day of wrath has come, and a crisis for God. Can mercy be exhausted and ultimately defeated? We'll learn that as we move on. And then John Oswalt has some reflections as well. The Christian church today faces a crisis of major proportions. It's a crisis of worldview. It's the question, is there any meaning to life outside of myself and the meaning I give it? Our culture has come to the very concerning conclusion that there is not. The implications of this conclusion are all around us, and they are profound. A culture where lying and stealing are norm cannot survive. We have lost the idea that there's a God outside of myself to whom I owe my obedience. As a result, and I'm not talking about the world, I'm talking about the vineyard. As a result, we obey the laws of the land selectively. We obey those laws we think will benefit us individually and those we are forced to. We're losing the idea of the authority of the Bible. In the end, unless the authority for moral behavior lies beyond ourselves, wrong will rapidly become right, and the right will become wrong, as we see happening apace in our society.